Okay, hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing my June wrap-up. I know I said last month that I was going to be doing weekly wrap-ups because I have too many books to talk about, but frankly, I'm too lazy to do that. It's enough for me to get in front of a camera twice a month. I can't be doing that like 6 times a month. I'm sorry, I'm just bad at planning and bad at being in front of a camera. So we're gonna go through all the books that I read in June. I read 25 books in June, which is less than I think I read last month, but like still a good number. Like I'm not mad at that at all, so we take those. And let's just get right into it. So the first book that I read in June was Station Eternity by Mur Lafferty. I needed something for the sky setting prompt on one of my bingo boards, and this was just the one that my library had. I tried to read A Winter's Promise and I just wasn't in the mood for it. I'll probably go back to it at a certain point, but just wasn't in the mood for that. So this was kind of my only option remaining, and my library had it, so I gave it a whirl. And I knew when I saw it being compared to Douglas Adams that I wouldn't really like it because I'm not really the hugest Douglas Adams fan, and this did end up feeling like just watered down Douglas Adams, and I don't even like him in the first place, so this was just okay to me. It felt like it focused really heavily on the, not even the murder mystery aspects, but just like the variety of ensemble characters, human ensemble characters we got in this novel. So it was a lot of introducing a character, giving them a POV, letting them explain their backstory and how they're connected to the case, and then moving on to the next person. And so I wasn't really invested in the mystery because we kept breaking away from the mystery to get all this backstory and all these characters, but then I wasn't really interested in any of the characters either because you just get them for one chapter, they explain their whole deal, and then they kind of just shuffle to the back of the line. I was interested in the sci-fi elements of this book, the sentient alien space station, which I thought was really cool and actually reminded me a little bit of the Citadel from Mass Effect, which is one of my favorite games. But those elements really take a backseat, and it's mostly about the human drama and the human perspective here. So not the most exciting for me, and I got really pissed off by the fact that this book, that like if you're gonna mention a specific social media site in your book, make sure you at least have a basic understanding of how that social media site works. Like there's nothing that pisses me off more than an author using a specific social media name in their book and dating it so severely like that, but then getting it wrong. Like, you have Google. How did that happen? How did this get past editing? At a certain point, a character in this says that she uploaded her, like she wrote a story about her experience and uploaded it to AO3, and she got a lot of karma. You don't get karma on Archive of Our Own, Mur Lafferty. You get kudos on AO3. You get karma on Reddit. So Reddit are spotted, but I know you certainly don't use AO3, and I do. So then I read Metal from Heaven by August Clark, which I really enjoyed. I had seen this book compared to Gideon the Ninth, and I knew it had like a blurb from Seth Dickinson, who's one of my favorite authors, and so I was very interested in this, and it did not disappoint. I thought this was a very weird reading experience, but one I enjoyed a lot. The prose is a very, very particular style, and I don't think it's going to be for everyone, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was like just so beautifully done, and everything, it's very lyrical prose, but it doesn't feel flowery to me because it feels like every word has a purpose, and that's what bothers me most of the time about purple prose. I don't really mind lyrical prose, but when it gets purple and just the descriptions have no purpose and don't feel like they really fit in within the story, that's when it starts to bug me. But in this story it didn't bug me, and I really liked it. I also really like the world building and the characters. I do feel like this book more than anything is a style experiment and a political or ideological manifesto, and so some of the actual narrative elements like characters and relationship and plot can sometimes take a bit of a backseat, and I do think the pacing isn't great in this book, but that's not really what I was here for the story for. Like, I felt like the other aspects, the style experimentation and the political manifesto part, were so interesting and were so good that it kind of made up for the areas of the story in which this is weaker. Like, overall, I just really enjoyed this, and I definitely would read more from this author. Next, I'm going to talk about these all at once. I finished the Patternist series by Octavia Butler, which includes Mind of My Mind, and then Clay's Arc, and then Pattern Master. And this series is really interesting to me because it was published in a very weird, almost reverse chronological order. She wrote the last book first, and then went back and wrote the second book and the third book, and then wrote the first book. So it's like the chronological order of the series goes Wild Seed, Mind of My Mind, Clay's Arc, Pattern Master, and that's the way in which I read it. But she published it Pattern Master, mind of my mind, Clay's arc, Wild Seed. And so that to me is really interesting because I feel like it explains a lot about why the series feels a little bit disjointed and why it can sometimes feel not so severe as like something like the cycle of Earthsea, and the way it like kind of changes its politics and its themes as the series goes on. But like that's why you can see there's kind of a disconnect in it. Like some of the books are way more interested in certain themes and details that Butler came to be interested in later in her career, whereas the first couple books, like you can tell, like Wild Seed felt to me a lot like Dawn, which is one of my favorite Octavia Butler books, and then Clay's Arc felt a lot like Parable, which is one of, like, I still like it, but it's one of my least favorite books by her, even though it's on my shelf here. But you can just tell that like her writing style and what she was interested in writing about evolved over the course of the series because they were all published out of order, and so you can really track that throughout the series. Overall, I did enjoy the series. I think it probably slots in between the Parable duology and the Xenogenesis series. So Xenogenesis is my fave, and then this, and then Parable. But I did enjoy it. I think Wild Seed probably was my favorite, and then Clay's Arc was probably my least favorite, just because that book is a lot of, again, it's the one that's most similar to Parable, so there's like a huge theme in that series in that story about like the threat of violent and sexual assaults, and that just personally I really can't deal with, even though Butler I think handles it in a good way. Like you can see what she's doing with it. Like she's not obviously portraying it as like a sexy or like okay thing to do, but just I hate reading about it, so I struggled a little bit with that one. But overall I did enjoy the series, and I'm glad I read it, and I think it's kind of one of her lesser known ones, so I do recommend it to people. Then I read A Stranger in Alondria by Sophia Samatar. I read her short story The Practice, the Horizon, and the Chain and enjoyed it, but I wanted to see what she could do with a novel, and I picked this one up. And I really enjoyed it. It's weird because I feel like I have so many critiques of this novel, but like I still really enjoyed it anyways. And like when I finished it, I was like, I again had so many problems with it and so many critiques, but I was like, I want to reread that immediately. And it also really made me want to reread The Left Hand of Darkness because it reminded me a lot of The Left Hand of Darkness, which is one of my, like probably my favorite book of all time. Just in the way that it's told, in the writing style and the kind of themes that it deals with, which I very much enjoyed, even though I felt like the protagonist here, I wanted a little bit more from him. He felt like a very passive character, and it feels like we never really get a grasp on his journey and like what he wants. Like he's such a passive character that he doesn't necessarily have character growth or character journey. He just kind of does what other people tell him to do, and that ends up taking him from one place to another. But it's like, do I only think that because he's a character who does not outwardly tell his emotions to the audience? Like, am I supposed to be reading in between the lines here? Which is why I immediately wanted to reread it once I was finished with it. So lots of problems with it, but I still really enjoyed it, and I really like the writing style and the world building. It reminded me also a lot of The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison, and the way it was doing its world building and just throwing you in the deep end, and I really like that. I like that style, so I do recommend this one as well. And then I read Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell, which is kind of like a lesbian monster romance vibe. And I felt like this started off really promising. I really enjoyed Shishi Shen and like the kind of horror vibes at the beginning of the story. And then like just as soon as she meets the love interest and falls in insta love with her, and like the story becomes a monster hunting story instead of a monster romance story. And you just always know the two characters are gonna be okay and are gonna make it out of there. I don't know, it just lost a lot of steam for me and became very boring. I feel like this would have been better as a short story or even as a novella, because it was just so long for what it was and for the amount of actual character and plot development that happens in this book. It was just really stretched out for me and really boring. I really had to push myself through that middle half. And it got a little better at the end, but overall I just wasn't impressed with this one. I think I just need to stay away from cozy fantasy too, because even cozy horror, there's just not enough going on for me. I need a little bit more. I read Sword Heart by T. Kingfisher, which is one of her first like romantasy stories that she wrote, and weirdly, because I'm not really a romantasy fan or a T. Kingfisher fan, I actually really enjoyed this one. I thought it was very charming. I liked the characters, I liked the world building. I felt like there was a really good mix of plot, of fantasy and romance in this one. This was like enough going on for me that I wasn't bored, and it wasn't just traveling fantasy going from one place to another. Like there was other stuff happening, and like the romance really was a big enough part that I weirdly, I know I don't really like romance, but the romance was a big enough part here that I didn't mind it, because it felt like it did get a lot of time and space to develop and like be properly fleshed out, but there was still enough other stuff going on that I wasn't you know, bored by the amount of focus on the romance. So I don't know, overall I just really enjoyed this. I did have a little bit of a problem with the ending. Like, I know it's a romance novel convention to have the characters end up, spoilers, married at the end, but like it just felt weird for these particular characters. It didn't feel like something either of them wanted or needed, and it's kind of phrased in a way where it's like, you have to marry me to protect your honor as an unmarried widow, and also because I love you. And like, that was just weird to me. I was like, why though? Especially because like this world feels a little bit wishy-washy sometimes on the world building in regards to like misogyny and women's place in the world. Like, sometimes there would be misogyny and like patriarchal views towards women, especially unmarried women, but then sometimes it would be like kind of a feminist paradise where like women could live on their own and travel on their own and hold all the same rights in society as men did. So it was just like a little bit like, do they really have to get married? Like, why though? Because we've seen plenty of women throughout the series living alone or living with partners who aren't married to them, and they seem fine. So I don't know, it didn't do enough justifying that for me. They've only known each other for like 2 weeks at this point, and both of them are widows and have like pretty complicated relationships with marriage and being married. So I don't know, I feel like they just needed to date for longer. But I would be interested in reading the Saints of Steel series now, which I know is set in the same world, and then allegedly there's supposed to be a sequel to this published next year, which I would be interested in because I spent the entire book waiting for those other two swords to come up to get involved in the plot, and they never did, and eventually I figured out it's because they were being set up for like books down the line. So I can't imagine reading this book in 2018 when it was self-published by T. Kingfisher and just waiting, like being on that cliffhanger being like, wow, I can't wait for the second sword to get a series, and he just never did. But now it's finally time. And I'll mention these, but I don't really have a lot to say about them. I read like 1 through 8 of the Animorphs series. Me and my friend are rereading this series. I loved this series when I was a kid. I had a huge box full of them passed down from my older cousin when I was a child, and I just blazed through that series. I absolutely loved it. It's so weird for a kid's series, but like so good, like weirdly so well written. Like, even rereading them, I'm like, these are good, these are funny, like these are well written. I'm glad I read them when I was a kid, and I'm glad I'm rereading them because I think they are very fun, and I'm glad me and my friend are rereading them. I also read Intermezzo by Sally Rooney, and this was my first Sally Rooney. I read it for a book club. I had never read any Sally Rooney before, and I think I had kind of like a preconceived notion about what I thought her books were gonna be like, and that was just completely blown out of the water here. I was actually just really impressed with this, and like how much it was about family and also romance and like grief over the death of a parent. Like, I don't know, I just thought it was really well done. I really enjoyed it. There's a throuple. Normally I hate thruples that aren't gay or woman centric, but she got me with this one. I did like it. I did think they could make it work, and overall, yeah, I enjoyed that one, and that made me curious to read more Sally Rooney because I did really enjoy Intermezzo. And then I read The Children of Gods and Fighting Men by Shauna Lawless. This is a book I read for a Reddit book club, and I don't know, I didn't love this one. I thought it was just fine. Like, it's not horribly written, it's not the worst thing I've ever read, but I just wasn't super invested in the characters or the plot. I felt one of the POVs was interesting as like this Lady Macbeth type character who's like very scheming and like willing to do anything to get what she wants, but also like loves her family. But she just, as the book progressed, she got dumb for no reason. She felt very inconsistent as a character in like the way sometimes she would be this political genius and sometimes she would like literally be too stupid to live, and you'd just be like, where did all that go? Like, what happened with that? And then the other POV, Fola, I think is how you say it, was just very boring. Like, she's the innocent pure foil to the other character, Gormfla, I don't know how to pronounce it. There was a pronunciation guide in it, and I immediately forgot, except for Fola, because that one's easy. Yeah, so I just wasn't invested in either of the perspectives, any of the side characters, any of the plot going on. And then it does like my least favorite thing with like the way that historical fantasy or historical fiction will deal with like the concept of feminism and like women's place in historical society, where like the good guys are all proto-modern feminists and respect women and like want them to have a place in their society, and all the bad guys are like the period accurate misogynists. And it's like, I don't necessarily need or want to see women and other minorities suffering in my historical fiction, but like, if you're gonna set a book during this time, I don't know, I don't want you to just shy away from it and pretend that everything was perfect and that, you know, only evil people hated women, because that's just not how the world works. And I think it would be more interesting and give this series more depth, but no, it just takes the easy way out, which I personally don't love. Anyways, I would consider reading the second book in this series because I'm interested now that the two main characters are like finally in the same place, how they will interact and how they will bounce off each other, but like it's not high on my list at all. Like it would be years in the future that I would read this. So and then I read the second volume of The Future is Female, edited by Lisa Yazek. I read the first volume of this a couple years ago for a science fiction short story class, and I enjoyed that one. This one's just stories from the 1970s, and I am using this one for my short stories bingo sheet on r/fantasy bingo, and I enjoyed this one too. The first story in this collection was so bad that I really worried about the rest of the collection, but I did enjoy most of this. Okay, I found it. So I did enjoy the rest of this collection. I really enjoyed The Day Before the Revolution by Ursula K. Le Guin, When It Changed by Joanna Russ, Of Miss Grass and Sand by Vonda Ann McIntyre, A Scarab in the City of Time by Marta Randall, and The Best Is Yet to Be by M. Lucy Chin. So a lot of good ones in this one. I also enjoyed the Eleanor Arneson short story because I love her writing, but it wasn't quite as impressive to me as those other ones. I would love to see them do more editions in this series. I would especially love to see them move forward into like the 2000s and do a volume for authors of color, because most of the authors in the first two volumes have been white, cisgender, heterosexual women, so some lesbians, but I would like to see more authors of color and more queer authors in any subsequent volumes they did in this series, and tell the Library of America that I'll buy them, so do it. Then I read The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. I remember reading a short story from this author a couple years ago, again for a fantasy class I was taking in undergrad, and we were reading all the short stories that were nominated for, I don't know, I think it was the World Fantasy Award, and one of her stories was nominated, and it was my favorite, and it won. So I was excited to read her novel, and it is a really tough novel. It deals with a really like dark subject. It deals with the Jim Crow South and a black boy being sent to a reformatory school for boys after committing not even committing a crime, like just doing something that a white person didn't like. So it's a really tough read, and it's even worse, I think, because you know that like the horror elements in this, the ghosts and stuff, are being played up, but like stuff like this did happen and happened very frequently and was very normalized, and so it's quite a tough read, but I did enjoy. I feel like it's weird to say I enjoyed it, but I thought the writing style was good. I thought the plotting was good. There was a real sense of tension and urgency in the book, even though we were like flipping back and forth between Stephen's experiences in the school and like his sister Grace trying to get him out of the school from the outside, and so I thought that was a good balance. I think that my one critique is that having perspectives from the point of view of the main villain, I feel like sometimes made it a little less interesting, because you knew exactly what he was gonna do without any sense of like mystery around it. So like you knew that what he was gonna do, and it was I would have preferred not to know what he was gonna do and have that like sense of tension and fear that came from that. Yeah, I think a book like this can really lead to questions of like how ethical it is to portray real historical events like this, especially tragedies, especially stuff like this in novels, especially in fantasy novels and horror novels. But I think that overall, like, Due does like the best possible way you could do something like this, using a story like this as an inspiration for your horror novel, because like she mentions in the author's note that she had a relative at the school that this is inspired by, and what that experience was like learning about that, and the main character is named after him. So I felt like it was overall like a way for her to take this like family tragedy and do something positive with it, as opposed to just like exploiting this tragedy for personal gain. So like I think she did it well, but I think you can use this book to lead into greater discussions about the ethics of that, which I always think are interesting. I read Feed Them Silence by Lee Mandela, which is a little novella about a woman in the like near future who's part of this science team who's trying to like create a neurological bond between the scientist and like the last wolf pack in North America, to find out like how they function and like what their mental patterns are like. And she becomes obsessed with the wolf and goes deeper and deeper into the spiral as her like marriage begins to crumble, and she like starts to lose all her friends and stuff. I just feel like this novella was doing way too much for the page count. I felt like this needed to be a proper novel, probably like 300, 400 pages, because there's just a lot that this book wants to tackle, like so many things: conservation, sustainability, climate change, a crumbling marriage, exoticism and racial fetishization in queer relationships. Like, there's just so much that this book wants to address, and it's so short. It's like under 100 pages that it can't really explore any of those themes. It just kind of tells us what the themes are about those things. Like, I hate any kind of story where the protagonist has to go to a therapy session and like just explains the themes of the books and like their own problems and their internal struggles to the therapist, because it just feels like them talking to the audience being like, here's my deal and here's this book's deal. Aren't you impressed by our deep themes? I'm like, no, I'm not, because I want you to show me those themes. I don't want you to tell me about them. So I thought this was an interesting book, but it just was doing too much for what its page count was. I think maybe if it had been slimmed down in scope and only focused on one of those issues, or if it had been expanded out into a full novel, which is what I would have preferred, it could have been really good. And then I read Martyr by Kaveh Akbar, which is a book that I've been meaning to read for a really long time. I picked it for my book club, and we like randomly select next month's books, and it was not getting picked. I was so sad. So I just decided to read it on my own for Pride Month. And I really enjoyed this. I felt like it was very, again, the prose kind of style that I like, where it's poetic and it's lyrical without tipping over into like pretentious and try hard. It actually reminded me a lot in that way and in other ways of Brandon Taylor's work, which I really like. But I felt like this had a much more cohesive story and follow through than a lot of Brandon Taylor's work does for me. I was not expecting the direction this book went, but I was very pleasantly surprised by it. I do wish that we got a little bit more from the arc with Z. Like, I felt like it just ended very easily, but I knew that was gonna happen because there were like literally 5 pages left, and I was like, how are we gonna wrap this up? Like, it's not gonna be satisfying. So that was okay, and I felt like the ending was just very weird and whimsical, and I loved it. And I would be very interested to see what this author does in the future. Then I read A Drop of Corruption by Robert Jackson Bennett, which really disappointed me. Honestly, I was really excited for this book, and I requested my library buy it, and I've been waiting for like months and months for it to get in. You know, they pre-ordered it. It came out in April, and it only just now got in and came off hold for me. And I didn't really like it. I'm very sad because I liked the first book a lot, and I thought it was really well done, and I had very minor critiques about the way that it was set in like a fantasy empire, but like the books just didn't really want to address imperialism or like colonization or like the way that the empire fucked over its citizens at all. But I didn't really mind that in that book because it's the first book in a series, and Anna and Din are like part of the empire. They've grown up in it. They don't really see anything wrong with it. So like, whatever. I don't need them to overthrow the empire in book 1. Like, that can be something that the series progresses towards and like explores in the future. And then in A Drop of Corruption, I felt like Bennett saw those critiques of the way that the book didn't address imperialism and came off maybe as a little bit pro-empire, and like tried to address them, but like went the complete opposite direction of what I personally wanted and what I think would have made it good. Like, for me at least personally, just like a lot of this book is focused on whitewashing the empire and making it clear that this is a fantasy empire. This is a good empire. It doesn't do any of that nasty stuff like imperialization and colonialism. It's nice. It's good. And I didn't love that. Like, if you're gonna have this empire and just like you don't really want to have the main focus be our heroes overthrowing the empire, then just don't do it. Like, just have them be in the empire and have some people critique the empire, and have Anna and Din have to sit with that uneasiness and like knowing that they work for this institution that like is so huge and ruins people's lives on the daily, and have them grapple with that. Or don't bring it up at all. Like, just continue to leave it in the background and continue to bury your head in the sand about it, because spending so much page time and so much of this book dedicated to bringing it up and then like excusing it and like continuing to act like this is an okay form of government and like there's nothing wrong with it, when like we can see the cracks, and in real life empires are so bad. Like, it just was weird to me, and it took away a lot of my goodwill for the book and for Bennett, like that he could address that in a meaningful way even later on in the series. Like, even if 10 books from now Anna and Din do make slowly start to become radicalized and overthrow the empire, like I don't know how we would get to that point, because it's been made clear that the empire in this book is just a cool little aesthetic fantasy backdrop for this mystery novel, and we don't actually want to deal with like imperialism and any of like the things that come with being an empire, which raises a lot of thematic questions for me and raises a lot of logistic questions for me. Like, how does an empire this big feed itself? How are they alive? How does any of this work? And we don't know. We just really don't know. We only focus in this book and the last book on the military, the Legion, and the Justice Department, the Ayudex. We don't see anything else. And again, how American to think that the only types of government that matter are like the military and the cops. And you know, the engineers get a shout out too, but like we don't know how people feed themselves. We don't know how food distribution works in this universe. We don't know if the Empire still does have colonies or if everything has genuinely joined the Empire at this point. Like, we don't know anything about this Empire. And the series is, again, just not concerned with that. It's just not what this series wants to be about, and that's okay. But like, then don't bring it up. Then don't make me question it by bringing it up in front of my face. It was just particularly galling because this book is so anti-monarchy, and it really holds up the Empire as like a not perfect, but like a preferable alternative to outright like divine right of kings monarchy. And in the author's note, Bennett has this whole like self-important spiel about how fantasy is obsessed with monarchy and autocracy, and we need to like get different forms of government in there. It's like, how is an empire better in any meaningful way? It is incoherent politics, and it just really bugged me when reading. It's like, just don't. Just cut it out. I'm good. You can go back to book one of like just not addressing it. That's fine, actually. I actually prefer that. It's not perfect, but I prefer that. So it just really soured my opinion of this book and how I felt about it. And like, unfortunately, I just think the mystery was just like more of the same. It didn't move me in any particular way. Like, I don't think it was done badly, and I did really like the setting of this book, Yarrow and Yarrowdale and the Shroud, and like the sort of cool, weird biopunk aspects, but the mystery itself wasn't super compelling to me, and then I just really didn't think the side characters in this one were as good. Mallow is fun, but like I just didn't really feel like we got to know her, and then like Din's side girlfriend hookup thing also was just like goes nowhere. All we know about her is her name and that she finds Din hot, and it's like, I want more of her. Like, why couldn't she have been like the way that the former slaves like overthrew their masters, whatever. It's just like, yeah, so it's kind of a shame because I did really like the first book in the series, but had those minor critiques. Then just felt like this one doubled down on all those critiques and made them like 10 times worse. And like, the mystery and the side characters and the romance was not good enough in this one for me to overlook any of that. Like, I think if every of those other aspects had been like really, really good and like my favorite thing in the world, then maybe I would have been like, well, like the politics of this book suck, but like I'll keep reading the series. But this just like totally was not, like, it was fine, it was okay, but it just wasn't enough to really make me overlook any of those things and be like, well, it's fine. Like, I don't know, I'm just not interested in continuing on with this series anymore, which is, again, sad because I really liked the first one. I read Green Teeth by Molly O'Neill, and I just gotta stop reading anything that is marketed as cozy fantasy because I, again, just found this really boring. It was like almost the same experience as Someone You Can Build a Nest In, where like I enjoyed the setup and the character. I thought that Jenny's narrative voice is very unique and very interesting, and then as soon as the actual plot gets going, I was just so bored because it's like travel fantasy. It's worse than travel fantasy. It's go here and get this fantasy, where like the whole vibe is the fairy king gives you a thing you gotta go get and bring back to him, and we know you gotta do that 3 times. So it's like, oh my god, it's so repetitive. We gotta go to this place and come back 3 times. I don't care. And I feel like with traveling fantasy and with quest fantasy, sometimes it can really be saved for me if the dynamics of like the traveling party are interesting enough and develop enough over the course of the book to make that like worthwhile. But it felt like this book was really focused on the physical details of the traveling and not so much the emotional journey development of these characters throughout the story, which just made it really boring to me. Like, at a certain point, it just is a lot of telling and showing. Like, we are told in this book that they've become such good friends, and I just didn't really believe it. Like, at a certain point, Jenny and Temperance have this like minor fight that kind of like snowballs into a bigger fight and like makes them like very angry with each other for a couple days. And it's like, instead of letting us see actually how that fight and that anger curdles and gets worse and builds up with no release over the course of a couple of days, trapped together in close proximity on this trip, we're just told, Jenny is like, and over the next few days I got more and more angry at Temperance. And it's like, okay, great, thanks for telling me, I guess. And then this is marketed as a monster story, but it's actually, spoilers, an Arthurian legend story, a Lady of the Lake retelling, which I just thought was very lame, and I thought it was very obvious. Like, from the beginning we get like a really pointed mention of a weird sword in a lake. You're like, oh, so that's Excalibur and she's the Lady of the Lake, which I think is just way less interesting to me than like friendly monster teams up with witch and goblin to like save England. Like, I don't know, I felt like this would have been better if it had been a way more personal quest, if it had been what it was in the very beginning of this book and had been Jenny and Temperance like teaming up against just like a guy like the religious leader who hates them. Instead it's like this world-ending like magical Fae King quests, and I don't know, I just didn't love that. Next, I read Rake's Fall by Vajra Chandrasekhara. This is the first book I read that was on the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize for Fiction 2025 shortlist. I decided I'm gonna try to read all the nominees this year. And this was the first one I read, and it set the bar really high. I really enjoyed this story. It was so good and so short. Like, it's like under 300, the actual story itself was under 300 pages. And I was just so impressed by everything it was able to do within that page time. Like, it was very ambitious, and I felt like it pulled it off very well. I just really enjoyed this kind of science fiction. It's like my kind of science fiction. It's very weird. It's very interested in temporality and like narrative in general and colonialization and like the viewership of the audience and what that means for characters in a novel. I loved it. I thought it was very good. Not perfect. I did feel like with a story like this, where like the viewer, the reader has to piece together what is happening on their own, it's like a really careful balance to walk of like drip feeding them information so that they are not rushing ahead and putting things together too early, but that they're not like just totally confused about what's happening and how things are supposed to link. And I felt like within some of the sections, it did take a little bit too long for that connective tissue to begin showing. Like in the section, I think it was part 4, where it's like this kind of murder mystery. And like, I don't know, I was just not very invested in that plot because I'm like, how does this connect to the greater story? But overall, I really enjoyed it. I did think that while it was a very complete and cohesive story, I wasn't quite as satisfied as I wanted to be at the end. But overall, I still really enjoy this, and I would read way more from this author, and this to me is my front runner, at least so far. I've only read 2 books for this project, but front runner, easily. Loved it. It reminded me a lot of Seth Dickinson, especially Exordia and his Destiny lore, which I love, so. I had it the whole time. My bad, guys. But isn't that pretty? I do really love the cover. I might buy this. Next book I read was Remember You Will Die by, trying to cover why did they put it right there? Remember You Will Die by Eden Robbins. This book I was really excited to read because it is such an interesting concept. It's like the story of an AI mother grieving her lost daughter, told through obituaries, and it's also told through like OED entries and like fake Reddit rabbit posts, and it's set like forward and backwards in time, very far in the future and in the past, and very ambitious, again, interesting premise. But then unfortunately, I just thought that this had a really great start and a really great concept, but it just is too long for what it is. It really meanders and it really gets dragged out and then just kind of peters out to a soft conclusion that is not as emotionally impactful as I wanted it to be, especially because the problem with telling the story through obituaries is that it kind of was like, the author felt like it was necessary to have this like rumination on death and grief and loss in every chapter, in every obituary. So it's like, that doesn't feel earned and it doesn't feel impactful after a while. You're just repeating the same 3 things about about grief and loss and death over and over again. And so at the ending, when it's supposed to all come together and be this big realization and this big like learning about grief, it doesn't really hit the same because you've been being told the same things over and over again throughout the story, and it doesn't have that emotional punch that you want. I also thought that this book takes a really disappointing veer into Zionism in like the middle part that I didn't particularly love. It's like not overt Zionism, but like this subtle Zionism of like portraying many people in this story who were born in or live in or are from Israel, and one of them is even like instrumental in the creation of Israel as a state, as a colonial project, and never touching the subject of Palestine or the Palestinian people or how like that forming of that as a state impacted those people and led eventually to the genocide of the Palestinian people. Like, it just really frustrated me, like especially because this is like a story set in the future, a sci-fi story, so like we see the creation of Israel and then like we never see anything past that, and never see how that plays out. We do later in the story get a little bit from this character thinking about how like this Mars resettlement project is just like colonialism by another name. Like, they don't call it colonialization, but it is, and like they didn't think about the people and the plants on Mars that were already there. They just assumed they could move right in and like use it for whatever they wanted to, and that's exactly what happened with Palestine. And it's like, the fact that that is not brought up at all and those connections aren't made at all made it a much weaker story, I think. And like, maybe that was supposed to be an allegory for Palestine, but like, why then is Zionism in Israel explicit in the story and made again, is just straight up there, whereas Palestine and the Palestinian people are like hiding behind layers of allegory. Like, I just did not love that, and I thought it was unsettling, and it just soured me on this book and made me more frustrated with it than I think I normally would have been. I do still stand by all of my critiques on the writing style, but like, I think without that, then maybe I would have been a little bit more positive towards it. But overall, just a frustrating experience. I do think it's unique enough to be nominated for an award like this, the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize for Fiction, but the execution for me was not good enough to feel like this is a winner or even really a front runner for me, but we will see as we continue to read through the nominees. And then the last book I read this month was Detransition Baby by Tori Peters, which I read for Pride Month, and I have just really, really mixed feelings on this book, and I feel like a lot of people who don't like this book don't like it because they think Reese is annoying, and like, that was not my problem with it. I actually think it's really cool and really brave to have like a really unlikable character as like the forefront of this story, because it's like trans women and any really other kind of minority, but particularly trans women, when you're writing about them, there's always kind of the pressure to make them perfect and not make them like not even a caricature, but just like not just to make them perfect and to really prove their humanity, and that means often portraying them in like the most angelic light possible. And so I do think it's really cool that the characters in this book, especially Reese, are very complex and flawed people who make mistakes, and that makes them interesting to me. The problem for me was that Reese did not really grow or even change as a character, and just that, so that made her story really boring to me. Like, the fact that this story just feels like a lot of generalization about gender roles, transgender roles, and cisgender roles, instead of being like a personal story about Reese's relationship with gender and her growth throughout the rest of the story. Like, she starts the story in the same place as she ends it, and to me, that's just a failure of a character arc. I found that Ames and Katrina were really interesting, were honestly a lot more interesting than Reese in their stories and what they had to deal with, but similarly, they don't really have arcs either. They in particular exist solely to really prop up Reese as a character and to kind of like offer her what she wants and then take it away and like lead to her self-hatred or self-grief or whatever, like her imploding. And then the ending of this book is just so easy. Like, she has this mental breakdown and they rush over to help her, then it's just kind of like, we don't address any of the things that any of them really did to each other. Everybody just kind of apologizes and lets it go. Whereas, I don't know, I feel like this story ended prematurely. Like, you have all these interesting questions about queer family and the future of family, especially in like a queer normative society, and you just don't go anywhere with any of it. Like, it felt like this book introduced a lot of topics, but then didn't really want to necessarily discuss or explore them. It just has the characters act as mouthpieces for them, say things, and then it doesn't go anywhere. And also, there are a lot of things in the story that feel like they are brought up but then dropped really abruptly, like Katrina accidentally outing Reese at work comes up a couple times and it's just completely dropped. Like, where did that go? And it really does feel like Ames just like drops out of a hole in the back of the story, when I think that they were probably the most interesting character in this story, and their relationship specifically to gender and transitioning and parenthood is so interesting. And then we just stop seeing them for like the entire back half of this book once we get all of their backstory, and I thought their backstory was probably the best part of this book, just exploring how they came to learn that they were trans and like their struggle with wanting to live life as a woman, but like just struggling with what that means and like the social pressure, but also how it makes them view themselves, and like, I don't know, just very interesting. I liked that story, but I don't know, I feel like Reese in comparison just didn't do it for me, didn't go anywhere. Kind of portrayed as this like manic pixie dream girl, and everyone is always talking about how interesting she is and how damaged she is, and then it just doesn't go anywhere. And also, I didn't really love the prose style on this. It felt very, again, like self-aware Twitter activist, which is funny because the book spends a lot of time dunking on self-aware Twitter transes who are like way too obsessed with discourse and like queer theory or whatever. But then the book itself is also really obsessed with discourse and queer theory, but just on being on the other side of it. And it's like, if I felt like that was purposeful, I think it could have been really interesting, but it didn't. It felt like the book was very self-aware in some parts, and Reese was supposed to be unlikable in some parts, but in some parts we're supposed to agree with her, even when she's being very generalizing and very just outright wrong. Like, I think at some point she says it's easy for cis women to get hysterectomies, and you're like, no, I don't think it is. That like, if cis women don't get hysterectomies, like, it means that they secretly want to be pregnant, like they want to have kids someday, and it's like, I don't know if that's true. But again, if that was just supposed to be Reese thinking that and being wrong, that would be interesting. But the way it's portrayed as if she's like dropped this huge bomb on Katrina and like shady AF comebacks, it's just like, I don't know, I really struggled with this one, but I would definitely read more from Tori Peters in the future, and I think that her collection, her new short story collection, Stag Dance, would be a lot more up my alley, so I'm more interested in picking up that one. But this one just did not entirely do it for me. Okay, and we are done. That is all the books that I read in June. A very fruitful Pride month for me. I feel like I've read a lot of good books, a lot of gay books, and I'm happy, and we will continue to move on into this reading year. So I have yapped for long enough. I would love to hear about whatever you've read this month and how you feel about it, and I will see you in the next one.